Hi, my name is Pat. Welcome to my journey of collecting postal history. I started, as a lot of people did, over 60 years ago. I was 7 years old. I started collecting stamps largely by family mail. I would take an envelope, I would cut the corner off, I would soak the stamp off, and I'm going to show images of all these things. And then I would actually cut the little corner around the postmark and I would save the postmarks. I did this into my teens. I also collected stamps by approval companies. And you get to a point in your life, for most of us it's our teenage years, where we have other interests. I was interested in photography. I was interested in girls, motorcycles, cars, more girls. And stamps kind of took a backseat to everything, but I never stopped collecting stamps. I stopped regularly looking at the family mail, taking the stamps off, soaking things. I stopped putting things into albums. I basically accumulated things through my young adult years when I started raising a family. About 30 years ago, I pulled out my collection. I had a lot of really common stamps. I bought revenue stamps when I was a kid, and some of those were nice to have and fair value and appreciate a little bit, but most of what I collected was very common family mail type stamps. A lot of the things I bought from approval companies were short sets where the high values weren't there. They're beautiful, colorful stamps that I later found out were CTOs, which are canceled to order, which are almost worthless, but they're very pretty little colorful stickers. Never really used for postage, but a lot of approval companies sold those, and a lot of us young kids like those big colorful stamps. When I pulled out my collection, what interested me the most was the stamps that were still on envelope, which I later found out the term was a cover. They were from odd cities. They had destinations that I wasn't familiar with. They had rates that didn't seem to make sense to me. And one thing I found in all of my postmarks I clipped as a kid and all the covers I accumulated since, there was nothing from my hometown of Fridley. I didn't understand this. I didn't know why. This was long before the internet, when researching things was easy. I went to the Fridley post office and asked them why, and the clerk was kind of rude to me and didn't have much time for me asking a lot of questions. There were other people there, and said that they're a branch of the Minneapolis post office. I asked if it had always been that way. He said as far as he knew. I just kind of took that as gospel and moved on. I decided to go to a stamp show. Hadn't been to one in 15 or 20 years. Walked into the place. One of the first dealers I saw was Mr. Dick Rudolph, who I bought from when I was a kid. Dick looked up from his table. You didn't understand, Dick at this point was going blind. He had his wife there assisting him because she had to identify things for him. And he looked up and he saw well enough. He had peripheral vision. He didn't have vision in the center. He said, "Hey Pat, where have you been?" Which I thought was pretty wild because, you know, as a kid, I spent $1 or $2 at the most when I visited his shop. But he must have been one of those people that remembered everybody. I bought a box of pre-cancels from him. A large box, like the type of box you get 10 reams of paper in. The whole bottom of the box was filled with covers, and the covers were all the things from congressmen and senators, that the Free Franks went back to the 19th century. He didn't even tell me those were in there. I found those to be fascinating. And it just kind of further enthralled me with covers. While at that show, I noticed another dealer selling nothing but covers, and he had a lot of activity. There were a lot of people. He had several tables in a great big U shape. He had people digging through all these boxes. I talked to the gentleman. He was from out of town, and he said, "You should be able to find Fridley." You know, when I asked him about Fridley, he said, "Fridley had a post office." He said, "I don't think they've had one for 50 years. I think they've been a branch." But even though he was from out of town, he was very knowledgeable about Minnesota history. So I continued looking for Fridley covers. It's kind of where my search began. As I was looking for Fridley, I found all kinds of interesting stuff. I was looking through Minnesota covers at first primarily. I found small towns that I'd never heard of. I found destinations that the rates didn't make sense to me. I had more questions than I had answers. So I joined a club. And I know the old saying about, you know, I would never join a club that would have me as a member, but I joined a club and found a lot of really knowledgeable people. First club I joined was the Twin City Postal History Society. Back then they used to get slide presentations. This tells you how long ago this was. We had a slide projector, we had slide presentations of different aspects of stamp collecting and postal history. The postal history really grabbed me. It covered areas that I'd never even conceived of before. I would watch a slide presentation on foreign destination rates. I'd go home and look through my mail, and lo and behold, I had some pieces that were covered in the postal history section. I would start yet another collection. And that's kind of how it all starts. As I collected, and I'm still looking for Fridley at this point, but I found some great covers in the meantime. By the time I finally found Fridley, it was at a stamp shop that no longer exists. There were 5 postcards with Fridley cancellations in there. So when I finally found one, I found 5. I found several since. But at that point, I had a lot of Minnesota covers. So I started putting together a collection of Minnesota covers. And I would find different things. All of a sudden, I started collecting the foreign destinations. I started collecting 19th century, the earliest covers I could find from places. One thing I found is that when you're collecting covers, it's not like collecting stamps. When you collect stamps, you get an album. There's a spot for every stamp. They're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. When you collect covers, it's your rules. It's not as uniform as collecting stamps. You collect what you like. So I would delve into different areas. When I'm going to go back a little bit, when I collected stamps as a young kid, this is probably before I'm 10 years old, I had ambitions of collecting every stamp in the world. It doesn't take too long to figure out that that's not likely, especially when you're a kid and you have no money. Then I'm going to collect every United States stamp. That's almost equally as impossible. What I finally settled on was I found something I can complete. I can collect every special delivery stamp in the United States. There was only like 19 or 20 of them. So I completed something. When I found out that I'm not going to collect every Minnesota cover, which there's over 2,000 post offices that no longer exist, and that's due to some are ghost towns, some are small towns that the Postal Service consolidated, and just like my Fridley was a branch office of Minneapolis, you know, all these little towns that had post offices that were, you know, post offices that were in a desk at the feed mill or hardware store or, you know, the train station or some place that people congregated at. Now there was a larger town that handled the mail for that town, and those little post offices either went away or they became branch offices or something like that. When you got something canceled there, it would say Mankato or Minneapolis or St. Paul instead of the small towns that were near it. So when you start collecting postal history, just remember, there are no rules. It's what you like. Because when you collect stamps, I think a goal for everyone that collects U.S. stamps is to have the first U.S. stamp. I got that not when I was a kid, when I started recollecting, because it was never in my budget when I was a kid. So one of the early covers I got then was the U.S. #1 on cover. In addition to my Minnesota covers, I wanted to complete something. To me, there was no such thing as a complete collection in postal history, but I could do special delivery again. And special delivery at this point was there 23. It wasn't much more. It wasn't much more than when I was a kid, because the special delivery service stopped doing special delivery stamps in the early 70s. So it had been a while. At this point, I was a little bit more knowledgeable. So, those 23 stamps in my postal history collection for special delivery is it's a little over 100 different stamps when you collect all the different varieties. There's color varieties, there's error varieties, there's different usages. You can make any collection as small or large as you want to. When you start looking for things like special delivery stamps on cover, you get into collections of registered stamps and certified stamps and insured stamps on cover. When you go to a show or something looking for them, they're usually lumped together or near each other. And those can be fascinating because, number one, they're a higher value stamp, and number two, they're much more limited than your very common stamp. In any of those things, going to a foreign destination definitely appealed to me, because I specifically went for foreign destination covers prior to airmail. So most of what I'm collecting in foreign destination is prior to 1930, prior to 1932, when the airmail started transferring the mail overseas. It wasn't that many years earlier that Lindbergh, Amelia Earhart were some of the first people to fly across the Atlantic, and all of a sudden we're doing daily trips of mail across the Atlantic. And when you collect that type of thing, never got big into airmail, but I was fascinated by the Zeppelin flights. I'd love to say I'm fascinated by the balloon flights during the siege of Paris, and they are fascinating. I have a friend that's got an amazing collection of that. I don't have a single one. They're definitely out of my price range, but if you got money, that's a fun area to collect. You know, 'cause every single trip is recorded, documented, and every single cover is expensive. But you know, it's a fun area. As far as Minnesota goes, you know, I collected all of the current post offices, and I think there's currently like 900 current post offices, and I have, you know, well over, I think it's getting close to 2,000 of the discontinued post offices. To me, the most fascinating area of collecting Minnesota covers has been the territorial period. And I'll show a couple examples of those. I'm not going to show a lot of examples of any one area here, because this is an introduction to me and what I'm going to do. I'm going to do a whole presentation on Minnesota territorial. I will do an entire presentation on other states prior to statehood. And not every state was a territory before it became a state. There were republics, there were districts, there were, you know, places like Hawaii that were 4 different things prior to being a state. One of which being a kingdom and another being a provisional government. It's fascinating finding examples from all those places. Along the way, I did a presentation once on, can't even remember what the specifics of the presentation were, but it was at a club and I was showing some covers that I just found interesting. And one of the guys said, "Hey, that's Mr. Walker." I said, "Who's Mr. Walker?" And he said, "That's the gentleman that started the Walker Art Center, and that's a letter going to Paris." And that was probably when he was buying art from the Walker Art Center. So then I started a whole collection of famous people, which would be anything from presidents, dignitaries, actors, any name you've heard. And I don't really think of actors as famous, but some people do. So any name that's in the know. I started a collection of that. Another thing I plan to show is I have specific dates I collect, which some people it's kind of odd. Started with my birthday, then I collected my wife's birthday, then I went for dates that happen less often, like things canceled on federal holidays, which would be things like Christmas and New Year's Day and things like that. You know, I would collect things with those cancellations, and February 29th, because we only see that every 4 years. Going back to 1840, I have every February 29th but 3. All 3 of those are on Sundays, and there are 2 of them are in the 19th century. One of them's in this century, which you would think, well, that shouldn't have been too tough to find. That was only a dozen years ago or so. Somehow I missed it. That's just kind of my introduction to everything. I'll dive into some other things further. I will show you some examples of all these, and I hope you tune in next time where I can go more into depth on each item. Thank you for your time. Goodbye.